Welcome to Unspoken Conversations with Candace, where we talk openly about taboo topics in order to spark difficult and uncomfortable conversations, where we allow a safe place for anyone who has had trauma to be heard. Unspoken Conversations with Candace is about speaking your truth by using your voice because you matter. Each season on my podcast has its purpose, and for season 3, it is dedicated to all male survivors. I want to express my sincerest gratitude and acknowledge Jeff Chugum. He was curious to learn more about my podcast. Once I explained my vision for season 3, he wanted to help. Thank you, Jeff, for your sponsorship and support. Special thanks to Jesse Daso for assisting in the planning, logistics, and helping to invite guests for season 3. And last but not least, Neil Parekh, my season 3 co host. Neil arranged to have Digimentors produce the show on a pro bono basis. Digimentors is helping me step out of my comfort zone by implementing video production. This form of media stream will be available broadly via our social media and our websites. I am extremely grateful to work with Neil and Digimentors. If you are interested in a high quality virtual or hybrid event, I encourage you to reach out to Digimentors. They work with nonprofits, higher education, corporate partners, international organizations, and others. It does not matter where you are based or how big or small your business is. They also do social and digital consulting, training, workshops, videography, recruitment, and more. Check out the links in the show notes for their contact information. Trigger warning. Before we begin, I want to make you aware that we are going to be talking about some very sensitive issues. All of our guests are male survivors of sexual assault. They will be sharing very personal stories about rape, incest, sexual abuse, and or assault. Please take a moment and make sure you are in an appropriate place to watch and or listen. Some of the descriptions may be explicit and have the potential of bringing up a range of emotions. It is more than okay for you to hit pause and come back to this later if you find that you need to.
Okay, Candace. So when I stop talking, count to three in your head and begin.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Unspoken Conversations with Candace. We are in season 3, which is dedicated to all male survivors. I am your host, Candace Sanchez, and I am so happy to be on this journey with my co host, Neil Parekh. Neil, thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Candace. What an incredible journey it's been. I'm just amazed at how much I've learned myself from interviewing all of these guests, and I'm so glad, not just to be able to share my story at the beginning of this process, but then to give others a platform as well. Candace, thank you so much for dedicating season 3 to male survivors.
Yes, I felt it was very important for the male survivors to have a place to go to, right? A platform that I could share, collectively in partnership. Again, I think this is going to break some new territory, some new ground, so that the male survivors can watch what we're doing, listen to what we're doing, hopefully reach out and come out publicly if they're compelled to do so. But that's why I believe this season is so special to give that space to those male survivors. And I just so grateful for all the guests that have signed up to be on this season. And so let's get right into our introduction for our guest today. I'm going to do as I do always to all the listeners in the audience here. Watching and tuning in, I'm going to introduce James Turner. James Turner was born in Solihull, June 1946, now retired, lives in Exeter, and worked for 30 years as a library assistant in Exeter University Library. He began writing and performing poetry in 1989 while recovering from the first of his two nervous breakdowns. He also writes biographical and philosophical prose, draws, and paints, and photographs wildflowers, birds, public notices, reflections, shadows, and other subjects. His interests include philosophy and the role played by trauma, especially childhood trauma, in individual lives, including his own, and in the history of the human race. His favorite authors are Doi Dostoevsky, oh, and J. Krishnamurti, and he is addicted to coffee, me too, and classical music. So I just want to welcome James Turner to our show today, to Unspoken Conversation with Candace, and welcome to the discussion, James Turner. Let's welcome him on.
Hello, it's great to be here.
Hi, James. Thank you for being here today. And I apologize right off the bat with if I pronunciation, I'm like, oh, I don't want
At the top of your list of favorite authors, then necessarily.
to.
Candace, this is a safe space.
It
It's
is a
also
safe
safe
space.
for mispronunciations.
Yeah,
Yes. Well,
you're
thank you
allowed to
for
do
your
that.
grace.
Yeah,
Thank you.
that's good.
So,
Uh,
James, we met, the way we got introduced was, the call of action that we had for this season 3 with Unspoken Conversation with Candace, dedicated to male survivors. I know some great partners, Neil being one partner, and then Jesse Daso also soliciting and getting the word out on Facebook groups. I think our connection was Mike Lew's, if I'm not mistaken. He was the one that might have also done a call of action or reached out as well. So I just want to thank Jesse Daso and Mike Lewis for, recruiting you basically, and you reaching out to me to be part of this season 3.
that's right. And Mike mentioned your name, and I followed that up. It
Yes,
sounded
you did.
interesting. Yeah,
Yep. And so we connected. I thank you for, getting an email and expressing the interest. You and I had a one-on-one, and really, I would like to get right into you being able to share your story. I know you mentioned when we talked briefly, we all age wisely and gracefully. And you talked to me, and that really hit my heart because the older that we get, right? And as life and our journey of life goes on, you kind of shared some of your story and just life crises and things that happen. So I really believe that your story will have so much power to those individuals that go through life, and how I feel, even as a reflection, it's better to address your trauma, in your younger years and really work through it so that you can be a better thriver in your adult years. I mean, I'm 51 years old and I'm still healing. It's a continuous process, but your story really struck me based on what you shared. So I'm so excited, James, to give you the floor, give you the platform to share your story, and just talking us through everything that had happened in your journey and how you're healing from this trauma.
yeah. I'm happy to do that. I'm happy to do that. It's like everybody's story. It's long. Well, I'm 76, and so it's a long story, even just measured in years. And a lot happened, but it is. Let's begin at. I'd like to begin at the end and say, yeah, I have got through it, but not without an incredible amount, an enormous amount of very, very good help from friends, one particular personal friend who had a good understanding of human nature and stuff, and called Peter, and books, especially books, um, and therapists. I've had some good therapists too. And there's one other thing I mentioned, and that is there's a link with Mike Lew here. There's a group, Exeter-based group. That's, by the way, Exeter, Solihull, all those places are in Europe, which is quite near the UK, and they're in UK actually, or Britain or England, somewhere like that.
You're our first guest from across the pond, James.
Yes, that's right. Yes, across two. Well, we're completely surrounded by pond here. If you walk fast enough. But what was I going? Yeah, that's just one thing. Yeah, and there's an Exeter-based group. It's a Devon-wide group, but begun in Exeter, called Momentum, which is spelt lowercase M-O, uppercase M-E-N for men, T-U-M. And it's a men's group, not because we are in any way against women or want to exclude women, but basically men have needed to catch up where women have gone and got and blazed the trail in coming out awareness of the endemic worldwide existence of childhood abuse, sexual abuse, and other kinds of abuse, and the effect that that has not only on the individual but on the whole of society.
And that is so true, James, which is why I felt it was so important to do this season. When Neil spoke, how Neil and I came to be was he was on a male panel discussion, and he said it out loud, what can the women do to help, right? The question was, what can we do? And, he said there's a lot of, resources and places that are very driven towards females. And that hit me. I mean, just struck me. And
Yeah.
I'm like, he's so right. And, I immediately jumped at that opportunity to say, what can I do? Let me help. How can I help? And that's how this season came to be. When I started my own journey, not realizing like the impact and sharing your story and giving that voice, not only is it a personal responsibility, I feel, you become this advocate, not only for yourself, but for others.
Yeah.
And I'm learning so much through the male perspective, understanding, I think that stigma around it, how, and in my Hispanic culture is very macho, very like strong and, don't tell your feelings, you're not supposed to cry. And I just think in general, that whole stigma that's just not true. You need to be expressive and explain how you feel. Everything is valid in what you go through. So I know you talked, about, when we talked, your childhood and some of the abuse that you endured. We don't have to go into any details. Share what you're comfortable because, again, power in the story of relatable, right? What others know, like, wow, that happened to me too. So if you wouldn't mind just sharing a little bit more about that experience,
Yeah.
just I know that was very powerful in that journey.
And even how you remembered it, how you first,
Yes.
you know,
Yeah, because
how you accessed those memories.
yeah, because there are sort of I didn't have any conscious memory of having been abused until I was 43 years old. After, while recovering from, I'll begin there because I'll very quickly get on to what the actual abuse was from this. But while recovering from my first nervous breakdown, which was 43, age 43, a former employer on whose pig farm I had worked for 6 months heard that I was on a psychiatric ward in Exeter. His pig farm is about 6 miles away. Came to see me while I was in hospital, and I was pretty well out of it. I mean, I couldn't really feel anything because what they give you, tricyclic sledgehammer antidepressant called amitriptyline I got then, and it was good. It helped me to sleep, and being unable to sleep was the last straw, which was why I had to go into the hospital. I was starting to do what I call attempted suicide attempts. And the difference between an attempted suicide attempt and a suicide attempt is that, and I hope this never happens to you, should you attempt a suicide attempt, you won't need rescuing because you will lose your nerve before you do it. And with luck, like me, you'll look back on those attempted suicide attempts and think, thank God that I'm still here. And I didn't need rescuing, or there wasn't even there was no failure to succeed in rescuing me. So that happened. That was what my I've had 2 breakdowns in my life, and they both got so bad that I was doing that, so I had to go into hospital and all the rest of it. But both those 2 breakdowns, it's the medical model that you get first. You're sick, you get medication, you go to hospital, you recover, you come out, you come off the medication, cheerio. But fortunately, with my first breakdown, this friend heard about it, came to see me, and we started talking. We must have talked to him for hours, hundreds of hours, one afternoon a week, starting off in a cafe in Exeter. And then he'd come into Exeter in his car and drive me out to his house, and I'd get lunch, and that we spend the whole afternoon from straight after lunch in his office talking. And he said, "Why do you think this happened?" You see, I thought my breakdown happened because I'd had a change of job, which also involved a change of geographical location, moving to another county in the UK. 2 notoriously stressful life events. But after talking to him, he never persuaded me of anything. He was great like that. We would talk, and he would go over it. He would ask me questions. He'd sometimes ask a question like, "Do you really think that this caused that?" And he didn't tell me. I would sit and look at it, and we'd talk about it. Then I'd see it for myself. And that's very good. That's really good. So it was like a shared journey. And there's so much I could say just about him, actually. But he did have this understanding, and he said, "Do you really think that a change of job and a change of geographical location in itself is enough to put you in a place where you're blinking, trying to top yourself? You're panicking. You're clinically depressed. You can't do anything. You want to die." No, I began to see that it must be something else. So we started to talk generally, that it's something that was there already. And the change of job and the change of geographical location were what we call triggers. And the bomb had been laid in my childhood, basically. The bomb, the trauma, that's when it was. So we started to talk, and I had no memory of actual trauma. I had some weird memories, but not of that. So we talked and talked and talked. And it was only once a week I talked to him, and the whole afternoon. I say only, it was a hell of a lot. I mean, that's free therapy, for Christ's sake. Amazing. I mean, it cost me hundreds. You've gone up to thousands to pay for that. And what happened was that I said, "Is there a good book you can recommend that I could be reading that reflects this?" Because this was a totally new understanding for me.
Mhm.
It made such a difference to my whole life. This is the beginning. It goes back to then. Like, it wasn't my fault. You aren't somehow inferior. You aren't somehow that awkward bugger who can't really live properly. He's got problems. He doesn't know where he is. You are like that because of what was done to you, basically. Life events made you like that, not genes or anything like that, or your own stupidity or anything like that. And that is a general thing. Everybody, but it doesn't necessarily mean there's blame too. That's one of the very recent things I've learned from Gabor Mate, because it's intergenerational. The person who abused you because they were abused. The person who abused them a generation back, ditto, ditto, ditto. And probably some people reckon that abuse, trauma inflicted on our own species by sometimes usually it's not always parents, it's adults and children usually, but sometimes it's siblings, but the siblings have been abused as well. So basically that's how it's intergenerational. And some people I know and have read reckon that this is as old as the human race. Something went wrong with a big brain and the hands that can grip somebody younger, smaller than and weaker than yourself, and there was rape and abuse and that kind of thing, which animals can't do to each other mostly. I mean, the higher apes can, but ducks can't. You know, you see people say, well, "What about your gang rape of your duck in your river?" Well, if you look at that very closely, the female with all these male is being chased along and sometimes even pushed underwater, but she can cope with that. She doesn't think she's going to die. She's not held down. It's not traumatizing. She just shakes herself, and the other males lose interest, and off they go, and she's okay. She's not shaking. She's not trying to commit suicide. You know, she's not clinically depressed. She doesn't have panic attacks. So there is a difference between those. There's something peculiarly human about all of this.
And I think it's so important how you mentioned, your friend just by talking with you and, I know you called it free therapy, and then
Yeah.
you read the book. I think it was Alice Miller's book.
Yes, I came to a halt. Thanks for that's the book. Thou shalt not be aware. That's the very book that I was reading. And what happened was I got a copy of it myself, bought it. And I was living, where was I living at the time? Can't remember now. Anyway, I had my own room and was living on my own, basically. It might have been in a shared house. It might have been a bed sitting room I moved into. Anyway, I opened the book. I was in bed, comfortable. I was in a good place. I was recovering, talking to my friend. The new understanding was beginning to kick in. And
It was all making sense. Like you were understanding like the impact.
But this book really was the big thing. This book really clinched it. And I didn't read very much of it. There was something, it was like, you say, well, that's a great book. I really feel I understood that book. I felt this book understood me. It was like having hands holding you safely, which is what should happen to a baby, It was that kind of feeling. Attachment, only it wasn't an attachment. That word attachment is so misleading, though. I wish they wouldn't use it, but if you have to think, you cross out attachment and put really love. But the trouble is, love is also a very misleading word. So you're stymied whatever word you use. But as long as you understand it, the words start to matter less. And yes, it was an amazing thing, this book. And, about what happens to you in childhood determines the suffering later on, in detail even, And it's not about blame. It's just factual. If you do X to a child, this will happen later on. And of course, why you do X, you look into that. Somebody's done X to you, or Y that's similar to X, or something like that in your childhood. So we've got that fixed. We don't have to keep saying that. And so, yes, that book was amazing. And while I was reading it, my first memory came back. I was awake. It was my first memory of abuse, and it was me. And I've thought about this since and remembered a little bit more around it. So I won't tell you how I got there, but I'll tell you now how I see that memory that I had back then. And how I see it is, it was actually myself around the age of 4 or 5, alone, fairly peaceful, sitting on a bed in semi-darkness or sort of half light. It was probably evening, and I was sitting on the bed, and it was like I saw my situation as being one world, I suppose, but divided into two down the middle. It was, and on the left of the divide was dark, semi-darkness or darkness, and my father, who was the abuser, and me, and nobody else. No words were spoken. By that age, it started very differently, as I will say later on. But by that age, I I had no conscious knowledge most of the time, but there must have been some sort of knowledge, because I was thinking in this memory, I'm remembering that I was abused painlessly without putting up any resistance. Somehow he's got me to the point where he got it down to a fine. He was a clever man, my father. He got it down to a fine art where he could just nip into my room. Nobody else would be there. My mother would trusted him with me, or me with him. She wasn't around. She was downstairs in the kitchen. She never once came up and opened the door and interrupted. What he'd do, he'd nip into bed, and there would be, I don't mind saying it directly if you don't mind broadcasting this.
Whatever
But
you're
it was
comfortable
it
sharing.
was it was it was anal penetration. It was what is colloquially called buggery. I think it's even technically called that as well. It's a perfectly good English word, buggery. That's what it was. I didn't even know that word then. And that the memory is very slight. It's a slight memory, but it's a memory of repeated occasions. It was like a routine, painless, and he got it to the point where nothing happened. Nothing was said in that side of the brain, in that side of what was going on. And so there were no words spoken. And then the other side was life, color, going down to breakfast, learning how to ride a bicycle, whatever was going on then, going shopping. My dad would go off to work, but in the weekends he'd be home. And that was the other side. The whole of it, and people talked to each other, and everything was open and shared, sort of thing. Most things were anyway. But and that was the memory. That was the memory. That was my first memory of the abuse. And I thought, wow. And when I told my friend Peter about that, the next session we had the next week, he said, he looked at me and he wasn't surprised. He said, I thought it would be something like that. And later I learned not only that he thought it would be something like that, but he was pretty sure who did it. He'd met my father. And my father was quite a tricky sort of character. He was respected in the village and so on, where this went on, and he was a retired army officer and did very well. Became a lieutenant colonel and all the rest of it. But Peter was a good. He could see more. He was very good at, as it were, reading people, understanding them, and I used to think it was almost like he got sort of almost magic powers in his ability to do this. But since I've recovered the way I have now, and you can walk down an average street and see people and the way they walk, their posture, the expression on their face, and you can't guess exactly what happened, but you know something must have happened to them. Most people, a lot of people are traumatized, and they don't know it themselves very often.
Mhm.
James,
You can see it. Yeah.
I had a question for you, if I may.
Yeah,
First of
sure.
all, thank you for sharing that, and for, painting that picture for us, with words, of course. But it just, as all these stories do, they just it's heartbreaking. And at the same time, it's so important that we get these stories out and that we connect with people. One question that I have, that I've been struggling with and talking to folks about, you talk about intergenerational um, abuse, and putting in this larger context, that it's not just about your experience, that it's, happened going back generations to other people, etc. As difficult as it is for you to even say these words, because I'm not there yet, but does this does that give you any empathy? Does that make it easier to forgive if you put it in that broader context?
Yeah, it's very interesting, that word forgive. I think about it a lot, in just not in a troubled way, but just how interesting it is and what people say about it. And that question, your question too. My father is dead, so whether I forgive him or not won't make an ounce of difference to him. But the thing is that forgiveness is about you, isn't it? About me,
Yeah.
whether I forgive. Um, and I think this business about not blame. I don't know. It depends what does forgiveness mean. I mean, I don't. When I think about my father, I understand that he wasn't the initiator of this intergenerational chain of things, which is fact. It's a fact. That is, it's a fact. It's not me letting anybody off the hook, or other people who've noticed this and say, Gabor Mate was the man who coined the word intergenerational in this context. It's just a fact. But then there's your personal story. In your personal story, do you forgive the person, man, woman, or whoever it was who abused you? And that would depend, it seems to me, on if forgiveness means that you are no longer boiling with rage, no longer affected deeply emotionally by the abuse, if you're no longer, no, I will always be deeply affected emotionally about it. Got to choose your words here. There's no longer an ongoing unsolved problem caused by the abuse in my being, if you like, in my consciousness, in my emotional makeup, in my psychology, in my mind, in my body, in my nervous system, in my brain. There's no longer an unsolved problem. The problem was never actually solved in the sense of, you found a solution and then applied it top down. It's just not there anymore. And it is, I suppose you could say it was solved by facing things and having all this help, which I've talked about, and having a new understanding of the whole thing. But you can't really put your finger on a solution. I can't really put my finger on a solution. And if by being in that state of mind vis-a-vis in relation to the abuser, you mean forgiveness, well, then I've forgiven him. But I've never said in my head, I forgive you, Dad.
Hmm.
And also, if you think that by saying I forgive you, that somehow makes it all right. Well, no, it bloody doesn't. It's not all right. It won't be all right while there's life in the universe. It won't be all right. It just is not all right. Not that I feel strongly about that or anything, but no, it definitely is not all right. So if that's what you mean by forgiveness, then I haven't forgiven him. Personally, I don't use the word.
I don't
Yeah,
know what I mean, to be
Yeah.
honest. I mean,
I
Candace.
Yeah, I was just gonna add, so, James, again, thank you for sharing your story and its rawness, its realness, it's, what you went through, what you recollect. I think, when I heard you, I as well, being abused, by 2 family members, adults, right? My uncle, my stepfather, from the age of 5 to 15, and that conditioning, those routines, those kind of, you know, you don't talk about it, you act as if everything's normal. There's this big facade,
Yeah,
the
right.
person's likable, everybody enjoys being around them, and you just go on living as if nothing's wrong. And forgiveness has been something that I've been on my whole life. I did get an apology, or, ask, will you forgive me? I'm sorry for what I did, from my stepfather, and I accepted that. I heard it out of his mouth that he admitted to me that he did what he did. He's never admitted that to my mother. I don't think he's admitted to other people. I don't care. It's the fact that I heard it. And not everybody gets that. And, a part of my childhood is I remember the good times and I remember the bad times. And so my trauma is what I struggle with is I still kind of hang on to that good stuff, and then, I remember the bad stuff, and I have that delineation of that line of, I carry this man's last name. It's part of who I am. And I forgave, and for me, forgiveness was more just because the person has no more power over me. I'm not allowing that power to reign over my life. And I'm
Yeah.
forgiving because, I forgive yourself and not carry that guilt and blame like I carried around for so many years. And there's something that makes me a little bit lighter. But there are so many survivors that I've talked to that haven't even gotten to that point yet. And it's okay.
Mm.
Again, I'm not here to say you have to, but it's a point of, I think, what you just said. When you address your trauma and when you're working through your trauma and you're learning how to work through it and you're talking with other survivors, that alone and having that community has just given me such a like newfound sense of life and what I
Mm.
live for every day. So
Mm.
thank you again for sharing. And Neil too. I both of you, I commend both of you for, doing this for and giving that safe space to the males with these stories. These are powerful stories.
I was raising my hand because when you made reference to people who have not gotten to that point yet, and who have not figured out forgiveness, and James, when you said, if that's what you mean, I don't know what I mean by forgiveness. My situation, they're two, they're if we're focusing on forgiveness, there are kind of two issues that I deal with. My story, that I shared at the beginning of the season, I was abused by a neighbor when I was 7 years old. He was 12. He came over and knocked on my door and said he needed help with a Cub Scout project. And we went into a downstairs room. He proceeded to abuse me. I had no idea what he was doing. I had no words for it. It didn't. It wasn't traumatic because we could have been playing with cars or marbles or what have you. Um, there was no, after I shared what happened, there was no consequence. There was no support. There was no follow up. It just went away. Uh, but what was challenging for me, what I still struggle with, is the following year, maybe the year after that. I'm still hazy on the details. Um, I engaged, and I put I because I still think of it as something I did, but we engaged in sexual activity, me and this neighbor that abused me, in the woods outside my house. Like, in theory, it was secluded. I don't think anyone could see, but that went on for several episodes and several, I think at least 2 summers. So I have a hard time, and I still struggle with forgiving him for the initial abuse and forgiving my 9-year-old self for what I feel like I did. And I'm kind of working through it, and I am trying to get to the around to this idea that I did that to take ownership over it, to try and own, kind of own the relationship, so he couldn't hurt me if I was bringing him in that sense. But um that's why I really am curious about that. And you know I hear that it's the forgiveness is, it's the survivor benefits if they can get to that point. But like I said, I'm still struggling with that.
Yeah.
One thing, Neil, I just, if I could, is the fact that, you were young, he was young. What was happening to him is a question I've always like kind of considered. And then who was hurt, if someone was hurting him, they didn't want to be exposed. We just, we don't know what we don't know. And when we
Yeah.
talked about that intergenerational, that's what struck me with James saying what he said to what you're saying. And I remember, being 5 or 6 playing house with my cousins, and we were hugging and pecking and touching, like just plain house. Like I was reenacting what was being done to me at 5. It wasn't so graphic, but it was like just the touchy feely kind of stuff that, and then someone boom catches us and then we all kind of scurry, but then nothing's talked about.
Yeah.
No adult says, why are you children doing this? And what is going on? And who did someone teach? Like, immediately you would think action, but again, uncomfortable. And this was in the 70s when I was young. So James talking about like your trauma, not long ago, that it's been years of this unspoken, discussion, taboo. It makes people uncomfortable, whereas what we're doing today and what we're going to continue to do is we need to talk about it. It needs to not be taboo, and shine a light on, this healing and this mental health journey, and what can bring us to hopefully eventually that forgiveness more for you. And so you can tell that inner child, tell that younger
Yeah.
self of you that it wasn't your fault. You did not ask for this to happen. You are not to blame. Um, and I'm learning that right now as we speak. I mean, I'm learning that right now as we speak. Having to write a letter to your younger self is the hardest task. You thought it took me 3 years to write the book. Oh my goodness, writing a letter to your younger self to talk about, it was like it's just pulling the Band-Aid all over again. And then
Yeah.
it hurts. It hurts when you have to go back. It does.
That's why I was asking James about, intergenerational trauma and that idea. I certainly wasn't. I would be the last person to tell you that you need to forgive, or that
Correct.
you have to be in a certain place on that journey. But that idea of, if you put it in that context of intergenerational, and as Candace said, who knows what else was happening to that person or what had happened to that person. Does that change how you approach that issue?
Yeah, I think there are two things. There's a chain of blame, which probably goes right back to the origin of the human race, and there's a chain of cause and effect. And I think forgiving, I've never had the problem about forgiving myself, because the memories came back so many years after it happened. And I never for a moment thought that the child that I was collaborated in any way,
Mm,
even in the first memory where I didn't put up any resistance,
sure.
because I'd somehow, something must have happened. I haven't told you about the first, I think something must have happened between the first violent abuse, which I only remember through flashbacks, psychological flashbacks, reliving about 30 seconds of actual terror, extreme physical pain, thinking I was going to die of suffocation, stuff like that. 2 flashbacks. Sometimes that, and I was a baby then, and I worked it out. Well, I had a little bit of help from my sister, who actually denies that anything happened, and disagrees with me and thinks that I'm not lying exactly, but somehow mistaken in a almost deranged way in telling what happened to me and who the perpetrator was and all that. She still loves her father, and at one point she was even saying, "Well, there must be 2 fathers. There's your father and my father." And those words came from the mouth of a mathematician and scientist. And
Mm.
there's only one reality, isn't there? I mean, a thing can't be both true and not true. We could be wrong about it. Things happen, and you ask the witnesses, and you get all sorts of different stories. But that doesn't mean more than one different scenario took place that they witness, is it? It doesn't. There's the logic of that is no good. It doesn't work. Anyway, that's what I think. And what was else? So I never had a problem about forgiving the child that I was, because between the violent abuse when I was a baby and the memory, my first memory, which came before the flashbacks, but roughly in the same year. I think it was a year and a half actually between the first memory and the second flashback. I can't remember now without checking my timeline, which I've got printed out in front of me actually, but it's near enough. You didn't need to know exact details like that, but that's near enough. And that between the when I was a baby and the memory of the routine, which must have gone on somehow or other, he must have. The word grooming is wrong, because he already was my father. He didn't need
Mm,
to groom, because you've
Mm.
already got this child trusting the parent. And but somewhere between those two things, which I have no memory of at all, the whole thing must have transitioned from the violent to the unresisted routine. And he would have had a hand in how that happened. He would have been alone with me and been able. And I tell you what, I'll tell you the two flashbacks now from babyhood. These flashbacks happened when I was about 43. The first flashback was the funny thing that triggered that was two things triggered it in a way. There was a sort of gentle, ongoing trigger, which was being in a situation, recovering from a breakdown, new understanding arriving from Alice Miller and Peter Fitch, my friend, the pig farmer, former pig farmer. Well, he was still a pig farmer, but I wasn't working for him anymore. I was in a good place. And I've lost the thread of what I was saying now. I was going to tell you about this. Yes, the flashback. The first flashback was, it happened in sleep. So I woke up as if from a dream. And I can remember fighting to wake up from this dream. No, I didn't. No, this dream wasn't. How did I wake up from this dream? I just thought I woke up and I thought, thank God that was a dream. No, I did. I was fighting to wake up from it. I can remember now. I've got it all written down. Towards the end of the dream was 30 seconds. At the beginning of those 30 seconds, there was me and the man, my father, lying on a big bed, no bedclothes. And I think we were probably both naked. I don't actually remember him being, I don't remember him well. I remember him well. He was lying on his side and I was lying on my back. And without getting up, without having to lever, I was so small that he was able to, lying on his side, reach out with his two hands, lift me up. And the mood I was in was absolutely love, happiness, innocent, childish happiness. And even while he lifted me up, there's no interruption of that feeling of love, childhood love. Baby, almost a baby. I must have been a few months old, 3 months old. And I've been lifted up. And then suddenly, the mood went and it was replaced by a searing physical pain in the anal region of attempted penetration by something much too big to achieve it. Absolute screaming, intolerable pain, really. And at the same time as that, the three things happened at once, actually in the same nanosecond, probably near enough. The pain, the onset of the pain, the locality of the pain, that's one. The second thing was terror. Mm. The feeling vanished, and in that same second, it was replaced by terror. Not fear, terror. And the third thing that happened was a non-verbal in the brain of that child. This is incredible. But I know it. I've read about this sort of stuff and other things too. The child, you know, when I put this on Facebook, right? I put something about this on Facebook. All I said was I was abused by my dad, violent abuse, violent sexual assault in babyhood, and I had a swinging email, not surprisingly, understandably, from my sister-in-law saying, "How dare you say all this? Couldn't possibly be true. You're deranged. You've made it up." And she said, "I know that memories don't start until you're 3 years old." Not true. If you do your research, okay. So anyway, I'm proof of it. You know, if anybody wants any evidence, just come and talk to me. But but the thing was that, yeah, well, I've interrupted myself too many times.
No, James, you're fine.
Yes,
you know, I just want
to. And then suddenly this, and then I woke up and I thought, thank God that was a dream. And I thought that wasn't a dream. Because you relive it. You relive it, all the senses.
Yes.
The pain, the sight, the warmth, the feelings, all of it. It's a reliving. And there's a part of the brain where these things are stored. Not everything that ever happened to you, but a hell of a lot. And as things are known about that too. And it reminded me of a program I saw on the BBC years ago of somebody when you were allowed to have a waking subject having brain surgery, and they take a little wire and touch the points in this part of the brain, and the person would relive some experience they'd completely forgotten, but they'd relive it with all the senses simultaneously for a few seconds, and then it would go again. The very fine wire touching this part of the brain, you touch another part, you get another one, taken at random.
Wow.
So there are places where this sort of stuff is. That's what it reminded me of. This flashback. It was as if somebody had accidentally touched the part of the brain where this thing is stored. That was the first flashback.
And I was just going to add, James, I think a lot of times when we're trying to remember and those timelines, I throw those darn timelines out the window because you're so traumatized and these things happen. You don't remember the exact day, but you know the event. You remember what happens. You know how bad it hurt. You know how you felt. You know what you experienced. I believe you. Like, and that is unfortunate when somebody else has a different version, and they're lucky it didn't happen to them, right? Or either they're just not admitting or whatever the case might be. It's unfortunate, period, that it happened to you, that you experienced these things.
Yeah, because
So,
they never had somebody called Peter Fitch to talk to them. They never had this new understanding, which I call the new understanding, which I suppose dates back to somebody like some of the earliest people who started to realize the importance of childhood conditioning with people like R.D. Lane. And possibly before that, I'd like to research when it was obviously something that was beginning and is now very much in the air. But even now, there are developments taking place, like the fact that more men, it's known that the statistics for men are much higher than was thought. And
right. I just think for people
and all
that
the
don't
support
report.
that's available for men too. There's in Devon, in Exeter, there's a thing called Devon rape crisis, and somebody gave me a booklet last year, and there was somebody sitting in the centre on a little table like that, a woman actually, and she had these little piles of leaflets. I saw Devon rape crisis, and I thought I'd take one, and I walked a few paces and looked at it, and it was for men. That was. I went back and said,
Thumbs up for sure. Yes, thumbs up.
I'm curious. You mentioned, and I'm sorry that you didn't get the support you would have hoped to have gotten from your sister. When you said you shared it on Facebook, did other people step up and?
Well, yeah, I had a fantastic response from all my friends.
Good. Because that was my experience when I shared my story. It was incredible.
Yes,
The amount
there's
of
a lot of
support.
understanding out there generally. I think my family is in fairly small. They're sort of a dwindling minority of people, but it is difficult to face, isn't it? I think one of the troubles, one of the reasons why, you see, neither my brother nor my sister had a breakdown, and so I don't know if any of them's going to see this, what they'll make of it. You see,
Are they younger than you?
Yes, I'm the oldest, and I think that is also probably statistical. I think sometimes the oldest gets the worst of it partly because the abuser realized. I think the abuser might have realized. You see, I had such pain, such actually at the time. The other flashback wasn't of sexual abuse. It was of the other flashback was 30 seconds, which had terror all the way through it. So that means that terror doesn't suddenly come from well, it does actually, as I've just it can come from nowhere, but it must have come from it must have started before and continued afterwards, because it was 30 seconds of terror, and it started off by me being unable to breathe, and the terror was I think of it now as being an instinctive, very, very young child, probably a baby almost.
I feel maybe life-threatening.
Of death.
Yeah, life-threatening, right? Life-threatening, where you're like, I'm not going to be alive after this.
Yes,
or,
that's right. I mean, no thinking. Again, I think this was probably pre-verbal because there were no words in any of these things. But what happened was that there was a head the hand pressing my head into a pillow.
Oh,
And I
James.
somehow knew it was my father's hand. It was like part of the visual memory includes everything, doesn't it? It's a total. You remember everything about the thing, including the fact that you knew non-verbally who it was who'd put their hand on the back of your head. Anyway, the hand lifted, and a few seconds later, I lifted my head and looked to the left, and total darkness, silence.
Well,
And then,
James, I am so thankful that you were able to share your story here
yeah,
today.
are we
Thank
running
you.
out of time?
Well, we're gonna be wrapping up soon. There's a couple of things I want to make sure we touch on. So I have a
Okay,
question.
yes.
I have a question for you, James. Have you read my book Unspoken yet?
Yes, I read it quite a while ago and looked at
Okay.
it again since,
So we're
yeah.
just going to put a quick plug for my book, Unspoken. Thank you for sharing the book you did earlier. That'll be all part of our episode. I think it's great to give resources to everyone listening, to everyone watching, to really understand that there's resources that us as survivors have used, right, as part of our voices, our platform. So this is my book, Unspoken. And then just a couple of, as we begin to wrap up, I have partnered with the National Foundation to End Child Abuse and Neglect. I am bringing, well, I shouldn't say and Can is bringing the walk together to help end child abuse and neglect more for awareness, for research prevention. And we brought a walk to the city of Milwaukee, Oak Creek, Wisconsin, here in Milwaukee last fall. We are having another one in 2023. I'm so happy to report. So just please stay tuned. I will be sharing all this information in the episode so that if anyone's listening, watching, wants to contribute to the cause of the National Foundation, to really help move the needle, help change the narrative, to put more of a positive light and what we can do together to prevent, to raise awareness, to do more research into this unspoken topic, this taboo topic. So I wanted to make sure I talked about the book, the National Foundation, and Can. But as we wrap up, we always like to end on the positives because here we are thriving. I believe you go from victim to survivor to a thriver, and we're still here. We're alive. We're still healing. We're working together. We're standing together. We are louder than silence, is what NCAN always promotes. I just want to say, Full Circle Blessings was the last chapter in my book. And I just want to know what you are most grateful for with everything that you've been through, all the life experience, the great people that were rallying around you to support you. What are you most grateful for? I'd like to ask James, and then we will ask Neil, and then we will get ready to close out our show today.
If I have to narrow it to one thing, what I'm most grateful for is when I was 23 years old, in my first job, living on my own for the first time, learning how to cook for myself for the first time, finding a book, which if I hadn't read, I would have had 3, not 2 nervous breakdowns. Well, who knows what would have happened afterwards? I don't know. But this book, I think it was my first great crisis. I was full of fear, and I was trying to solve it through effort, trying to, because that's what you're taught at school. You have a problem, solve it through effort. You want to pass an exam, put a lot of effort into it. You want all this sort of stuff. And I was trying to solve it through effort. And the book from which I've got most from all the books that I've ever read is it's called The First and Last Freedom, and it's by a man called J. Krishnamurti. And he's not a guru, and he didn't have thousands of mistresses or lots of money. He was quite a different sort of man, but you can look him up and read about him. And there's a jkrishnamurti.org. You can access his complete talks, writings, and other works free of charge.
Thank you, James. Thank you for sharing. Neil, what are you most grateful
I can say
for?
one, but there's so much I haven't said.
Oh, You know what? Maybe we'll do another episode follow
Sure.
up. We haven't really talked about where this could possibly go in the
Yeah,
future.
no,
We're
that's
gonna
okay. No, it's fine. It's been fantastic to be able to
James,
say.
thank you so much. Thank
Yeah.
you so much. Thank
Anyway,
you.
Neil.
Neil.
Candace, as always, I'm thankful for this whole season. As I've said before, i- the hope is that people will watch this episode. James, I don't know how your family is going to respond on Facebook. Hopefully, your friends will rally around you. The hope is that by sharing our stories, by creating this platform, it not only helps us, and the call to action that I'd issued last year was to please make space for men, asking women to help men tell their story, to give them a chance to um, find their voice. Candace, you've done this in spades, so thank you. um, but really, what I'm thankful for, if people watch it and are inspired and get comfort from this, if they are if it helps them to share their story one on one or in a group, that would be wonderful. I am personally thankful for everything I'm learning through this season, with each interview, with each guest. I'm on my own personal journey of healing and discovery, and I'm learning something from each of our guests, and it's getting me a little bit closer um, to something. I'm not sure what. But it's a journey, and I'm moving forward in that journey. So really, I can't thank you enough for that, Candace.
Oh, Neil, thank you. Thank you both again for being here. What I'm most grateful for is the fact that you take your experience, this journey of life, like I like to say, I turned my mess. It was a messy situation into a message. I was tested so many times, also wanted to commit suicide. Thank God I didn't, and that I'm able to live life to the best of my ability to be a better version of myself. I'm growing and learning every day, and I'm just grateful to have support. There's some non-believers, and that's okay. This isn't then for them, and I've started to accept that more and more, is that I want to have conversation with people that want to speak about it. And it's not always about the trauma, right? It's about the healing. It's about the journey. It's about the experience. It's about being, having a group of support, a support system. This is a community to me. And I can't wait to see what continues to happen for Unspoken Conversation with Candace. I'm so grateful for the season 3, very special. All my seasons have a reason for the season, right? And this is a special reason. Answering the call of action, I just felt it was my duty and that personal responsibility, not only being an advocate for myself, but for others, which includes the male perspective. So thank you for tuning in today to another episode of Unspoken Conversation with Candace. Thank you, James. Thank you, Neil. I appreciate you both. And so we will wrap up the show and close out, and everybody have a great, great day, great evening.
And,
Appreciate everyone for tuning in and listening in and watching.
and before we leave, so thank you, James. And before we leave, Candace, what an incredible conversation with James. And this idea of intergenerational trauma is really going to stick with me. Um, and how it ties to forgiveness. Again, I mean, earlier guests have talked about forgiveness, the importance of forgiveness for its own sake, without any additional, I don't say incentive, but kind of motivation or instigation to forgive. But I mean, if we can't have empathy, if as survivors, I mean, I would think that's one thing that we do have, is we have empathy for other survivors.
Mhm,
And if we put that in context, and if we actually think of our abuser as a survivor,
mhm.
not quite there yet, but we need to be able to
And we may never know,
embrace
Neil.
them, right?
Yeah, and we may never know either. We may not have those answers, get those answers, but I think just by having these conversations, right, and doing this reflective work with our own journeys, our own personal journeys, but then hearing the other stories. And just I just want to say kudos to James being very, just can you imagine just when I think about, wow, the trauma, all I kept saying was WOW with the wow, like, oh my gosh, like
Yeah.
this, and from it sounds like from an infant almost,
Yeah.
to those young just years where how could you fend for yourself if you're being hurt in such a way? And I just really I'm praying, that he will get the support because he has our support, and
He does.
sometimes that's all the support you need. So we
W-
have a whole community that's rallying around this effort, and I'm just so thankful for everyone that's really supporting us in this effort.
When he was describing it, I could only the only words that came through my mind was it was a horror story. I mean, he used the word terror, but
Here,
it was just a horror story that he was describing. And I think that each of our guests have had their own. I mean, trauma. We're bound together as in this instance as survivors, all of us, and male survivors more specifically. Um, and there's some things we can identify with each other and relate to each other, but each story is unique. Each story has its own nuance and its own uh, challenges. And I think that's again one thing I take away is that when do talk to others, to understand kind of where that line is, where can we draw those connections, and where can we take a step back and say this is your story, this is unique to you, and honor that and respect that. So again, Candace, thank you, thank you. It's such a pleasure to be your co-host and to be helping with the production of this season. And we're doing some good. I have to believe we're doing some good.
we're doing some great work, Neil. So thank you for being my co-host this season. This is a special season, and I'm so glad to have answered the call of action. So thank you. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you for tuning in, listening, watching. We appreciate you.